On my 63rd birthday, the morning lay shrouded in a cold mist, heavy with the weight of an omen. On the front step sat an anonymous box, with nothing but a slip of paper inside bearing 2 words, "Happy Birthday." The handwriting, sharp, unmistakable, belonged to the son I had raised for 23 years. It had been 3 years since I last saw him, yet the wound had never healed. Inside was a limited edition bottle of whiskey. The glass shimmered, the golden label gleamed, and the red wax seal crowned it like a treasure. It was flawless in appearance, yet that very perfection stirred unease beauty wrapping around hidden danger. Liam didn't know I had given up drinking 3 years earlier, when doctors warned me about my failing heart. His gift felt like a cruel, mocking joke. I didn't open the bottle. Instead, I gave it to Henry, his father-in-law. I thought it was just a bottle of whiskey, but I was wrong, because that very gift almost cost us our lives. And chillingly, that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I placed the bottle of whiskey on the kitchen table. Morning light slipped through the blinds, no longer warm golden stripes, but thin blades cutting the room into blinding shards of brightness and pools of heavy shadow. The air was suffocating, as if a warning hung in suspension. The whiskey caught that light, gleaming not like a treasure, but like a beast pretending to sleep. Deep green label, gold lettering, red wax seal, every detail radiated flawless elegance. Yet that very perfection felt unnatural, like something too polished to be trusted. Beauty hiding danger. I ran my thumb lightly across the seal. The wax was cool beneath my skin, but the sensation crawled up my spine, chilling, as if I had touched a door that should never be opened. Whiskey had once been my pleasure. One glass, slow, deliberate, a reward at the end of a day, fixing gutters or mending fence boards. When Amina was alive, she would pour us each a glass every Sunday evening. We'd sit on the porch swing, letting the sound of crickets fill the silence. Those memories were once warm. Now, they only made the present feel heavier, a bitter contrast between days once alive and today's suffocating quiet. Liam knew well I had given up drinking since the doctor listed every indulgence I could no longer touch. He was there that day, sitting by my hospital bed. I remember the glow of his phone lighting his face more than the glance of his eyes toward me. Back then, I told myself he was just distracting himself from the fear, but now, I'm not so sure. The distance between us was never loud, never an explosion of words. It was built slowly, brick by brick, with cold silences, intentional, not accidental. The envelope beside the box was plain white, lifeless. Inside, a single card with 2 words scrawled in blue ink. "Happy Birthday." No Dad, no signature. Just 2 words, standing there as if afraid to reveal anything more. But I knew that handwriting instantly sharp, familiar, enough to make my chest tighten as though an unseen hand had seized it. I did not open the bottle. I did not try it, nor even let myself imagine doing so. I pushed it across the table, as if to shove away a lurking threat. Then I turned back to my cup of coffee, now cold, knowing deep down that the whiskey had already become a shadow seated in the room and perhaps, from this moment on, in my life. The kitchen clock ticked, talked, each heavy beat, as though every second was draining a breath from a house already suffocating in silence. The sound no longer simply marked time, it pressed like a threat, a warning that something was drawing near, slow but unstoppable. In my mind, Henry's face appeared clearly. Henry, the man everyone in town knew as the very image of decency. He was never empty-handed, never without a set of tools in the bed of his truck. I remember 2 years ago, after a storm tore half the shingles from my roof, when the clock had only just struck 8 a.m., Henry was already on a ladder, hammer glinting in the sun, before I had even tasted my first sip of coffee. He never needed to be asked. He simply showed up, as if helping was as natural to him as breathing. Henry was a man of integrity, someone who deserved the good things life rarely hands out. If anyone ever truly earned a gift, it was him. And perhaps that is why the truth, when it came, felt all the more merciless. I looked at the whiskey bottle lying on the table, glass clear, label refined, the red wax gleaming like the seal of a secret that should never be broken. It was no longer just a drink. It was an omen, a vessel carrying unease wrapped in the disguise of flawless beauty. I knew I couldn't drink it. My weakened heart had closed that door forever. Keeping it in the house only made the air heavier, like hosting a shadow that refused to leave. So I decided to give it to Henry. I told myself he would know how to turn it into joy, open it, pour it into glasses, share it with friends. He would make it into a story, a memory worth keeping, rather than letting it gather dust behind glass. But when I pictured Henry holding that bottle, my chest tightened. In my imagination, his eyes lit with simple delight, his steady hands wrapping around the gift I offered. And yet, at the very same moment, a darkness pressed in a sense that this act, this seemingly innocent exchange, was the very beginning of a spiral of danger he should never have had to bear. A gift meant as gratitude, but transformed into a curse. By mid-afternoon, the bottle of whiskey lay on the passenger seat of my old Chevy, the seatbelt strapped tight around it as though binding a dangerous creature. I didn't know why I did it, perhaps just habit, but the thought of it rolling loose, shifting freely along the road, unsettled me. It felt as if one jolt, one bump, might unleash the secret sealed within. The sun sank westward, pouring that amber light so typical of late October. But it no longer looked beautiful. It resembled the color of decay, a fading glow that warned of something ill waiting ahead. Along Maple Hollow Road, the fields had turned brown, with dry cornstalks jutting up like blackened, skeletal fingers. The air carried the acrid tang of burning straw, thick and suffocating. Henry's house appeared at the edge of town, a white-painted wooden home with a wide wraparound porch, straight, honest, like something lifted from an old postcard. Yet to me, it looked more like a perfect stage, waiting for a play whose tragedy had not yet been revealed. I pulled in, gravel crunching under the tires, then cut the engine. Henry opened the door before I could knock. He wore a red flannel shirt, faded jeans, and boots still dusted with sawdust, a man who lived the life of labor, so upright you'd never imagine him being dragged into anything darker than sun, wind, and honest work. His eyes landed immediately on the bottle in my hand. He studied it longer than usual, a gaze that carried both curiosity and caution. "Noah, what's this?" he asked, stepping forward. "From Liam," I said, extending the bottle toward him. Then I added quietly, waited, "Whether it's a gift or a message, I can't be sure." Henry took it carefully, turning it in his hands. In the fading light, the red wax gleamed like congealed blood, the gold lettering on the label flashing with a kind of brazen beauty. He muttered, "Perhaps just a good message, but whiskey like this, sometimes it feels more like a secret locked in glass." I nodded. "I thought you'd enjoy it more than I would. Or at least, know how to turn it into something worth remembering." Henry smiled faintly, though the smile never reached his eyes. He said, "Then tonight I'll make it a special night. Thank you, Noah." I nodded again, but as I turned away, a stone weight settled deeper in my chest. It didn't feel like relief to have passed it on. It felt like I had just placed into the hands of an honest friend a package I was never certain should be given. The late afternoon light slanted across the Chevy's dashboard, stretching my shadow into the shape of a question mark. I started the engine, but in my mind, the image of Henry holding that bottle lingered like an omen waiting to be named. A gift. A gesture of gratitude. Or the beginning of disaster. On the drive home, my mind wouldn't let go of the whiskey. It was no longer a gift, but an obsession, as if it were still strapped into the passenger seat beside me, though I had already left it at Henry's bine. Liam was never the kind of man to spend large sums without reason. Back in his youth, half the time he borrowed money from me just to fill his tank and forgot to pay it back. So why now? Why send me a bottle he knew I could never touch? The thought gnawed at me like a hidden tooth in the dark, making me shiver as I pulled into the driveway. I told myself. Not everything needs a reason. But deep down, I didn't believe my own words. That evening, I made a pot of stew. Onion and carrot filled the air with warmth, yet the house remained cold and empty. A meal is always better when shared, and I sat alone, listening to the wall clock tick, tick, each beat heavy as a hammer, dragging time toward 9 o'clock. Sigh. As I rinsed the last plate, the landline rang. The shrill sound split the silence of the room, alien and jarring. It had been years since anyone called that number. "Hello, Dad." Liam's voice smooth, almost casual, as if the 3 years of silence had never existed. I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding in my chest. "Liam." "Happy birthday," he said, a half-beat of hesitation, practiced to sound natural. "You got my gift, didn't you?" "I did." "What did you think?" "It's a fine bottle." A pause. Then his tone sharpened, taut and cutting, almost a command hidden in a question. "Have you tried it yet?" I clenched the receiver. "Number, I gave it to Henry. I thought he would appreciate it more." Silence. Not static, not a broken line, but a silence so thick it pressed down like night itself, filling the room. Then his voice returned, slow, deliberate, each word forced through clenched teeth. "You gave it to Henry?" "That's right." A long breath hissed across the line, not relief, but something darker, bitter, a sound steeped in malice. "Huh." Then the line went dead. I stood frozen, staring at the receiver, my hands heavy as lead. The clock on the wall went on ticking, tick, tock, tick, as though it knew something was drawing near. Inside, my stomach twisted, not from stew, but from a shapeless dread, the way he had asked about the bottle, as though it weren't a gift at all, but a ritual, a secret sealed inside glass. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. But sleep would not come. When it finally did, it was shallow, restless, leaving me more drained than before. In my dreams, I saw the bottle unopened, untouched, standing there in the dim light, glinting softly, like a shadow that knows how to wait. That morning was unnaturally quiet. The wall clock ticked each second with sharp precision, while the dripping from the coffee maker echoed as though it were the only sound left in the entire house. I sat at the table, trying to read the newspaper, telling myself that today I would let my mind drift elsewhere. But the silence felt like a thin fog, pressing heavier on my chest with every breath. By noon, the house was torn open by the shrill ring of the landline. The sound cut through the stillness so violently that I jolted. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. I picked up. "Mr. Noah," a woman's voice came through, broken by quick, uneven breaths. I'm Amina Carson." There was a short pause. Then she blurted out as though in tears. Henry is in the hospital." I shot up. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and smashed against the table, the dark liquid spreading in a thin stain across the wood like diluted blood. "He collapsed?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "They think," she faltered, lowering her voice as though afraid of the word itself. "It may have been poisoning." The kitchen spun. From the receiver came the sounds of the hospital bleeding into my home, the steady beeping of monitors, the hurried pounding of rubber soles on tile, the sharp clatter of metal on metal. Together they formed a chilling symphony, a prelude to disaster. "He was fine last night," she continued, her voice trembling. "We had a glass of whiskey with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand. The doctors are running tests." My lips went dry. My eyes drifted to the counter, the spot where that bottle of whiskey had rested less than 24 hours before. "Did he eat anything unusual?" Amina pressed, almost frantic. "No," I swallowed hard. "But yesterday I gave him a bottle of whiskey." She fell silent for a beat. Then her voice returned, low and quivering. Was it the whiskey? From Liam?" I shut my eyes. Yes. The chaos of the hospital flooded back through the line, monitors beeping faster, metal striking hard, someone shouting for a nurse. Finally, Amina drew in a ragged breath and said, "I'll tell the doctors. If you remember anything else, anything at all, call me." I promised, then hung up. The house sank into silence again, the October light outside the window now pale and flat, like a sheet of dull silver. I stood motionless for a long time, until finally I moved toward the trash bin. Near the bottom of the bag, something white caught my eye. I bent down, my heart racing. It was a small plastic bottle, the kind that usually holds vitamins, but with no label. Inside clung only a faint dusting of powder, smeared across the surface like the residue of poison left behind. I couldn't remember ever throwing it away. Light from the window struck its surface, leaving a ghostly gleam, as though the bottle itself were glowing out of the darkness. I stood frozen, gripped by the sense that I was staring at an omen, one more reminder that the nightmare had only just begun. I picked up the small white plastic bottle from the bottom of the trash bag. The cap was still screwed tight, but the chill radiating from it made my skin prickle. I stepped toward the refrigerator. When I pulled the door open, a blinding white light spilled out, not the glow of a kitchen appliance, but the cold glare of an operating room. On the middle shelf sat a small glass jar, half filled with whiskey, the portion I had poured out for Henry to taste before handing him the full bottle. I hadn't even remembered keeping it until that very moment. The jar looked harmless, ordinary, like something left behind and forgotten, but I knew that the amber liquid shimmering inside was hiding a deadly secret. I placed it next to the plastic bottle. Side by side on the counter, they looked like two silent witnesses waiting to be called. Oliver, his name flashed in my mind. More than 30 years ago, we had served together. Now he ran a small veterinary lab on the edge of town. I remembered one winter, pulling his truck out of an ice ditch. He owed me a favor. It was time to collect. "Oliver," I said when he picked up, my voice low and urgent, "I need you to test something. Keep it quiet." He hesitated, his breath crackling through the line. "What is it? Whiskey? Maybe—" and something else. He didn't ask further, only said, "Tonight, after the lab closes." That night, I drove the old Chevy with the glass jar wrapped in a paper bag, buckled neatly in the passenger seat. Every turn of the wheels stretched the cord in my chest tighter. The engine hummed steadily, but in my ears it sounded like a pounding heartbeat. The radio was silent, leaving a heavy stillness so quiet I could hear the faint whistle of wind seeping through the cracks in the window. Oliver was waiting in the lot, a white lab coat draped over his sweater. When I handed him the bag, his eyes locked on mine, wary. "Is this something I'll regret knowing?" he asked. "Just tell me what's inside," I rasped. He nodded, took the bag, and disappeared inside. I sat in the car, gripping the wheel until my hands went numb, my breath fogging the glass. Outside, the daylight bled away, and darkness dropped like a curtain. My mind replayed every detail of the past 24 hours, the handwriting on the envelope, the whiskey bottle, Liam's voice when I told him I had given it to Henry, and that suffocating silence afterward. My stomach clenched. Oliver called the next afternoon. His voice was slow, weighted, as though dragging the words out to keep from saying them. "Noah, you're not going to want to hear this. The whiskey contained white snake root. In the right dose, it can stop a man's heart. In a man." I closed my eyes. The phone grew heavy, leaden in my hand. "You're saying Henry drank it?" "Yes." And me? Not yet?" "Not yet." He exhaled slowly, the sound like a knife drawn across stone. "Then, Noah, you may have just dodged a bullet." Silence. In my ears, only the rushing of blood through my veins. And that was where the first part of this story ended. Not with an answer, but with an abyss. Had Liam truly sent me a gift or a death sentence sealed in glass? One thing was certain. It wasn't just a gift. It was a message, a deadly warning. And its shadow was only beginning to spread. I used to think there was no sound worse than a phone ringing in the middle of the night, but I was wrong. Worse than that is when the phone rings at the very moment you already know deep in your gut, that the news won't be good. When Oliver hung up after uttering only half a sentence, "In that whiskey, there's white snakeroot, in that dosage it could," and then went silent, the entire world around me froze. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. I couldn't just sit there and endure it. I yanked my coat from the back of the chair, fingers trembling as I snatched the keys from their hook by the door. The sound of fabric snapping shut was sharp, the clatter of the keys heavier than usual. I rushed to the old Chevy, the engine jolting to life with a growl that felt like my own heart pounding against my ribs. The road to Mercy Hospital stretched longer than it ever had before. The red lights seemed endless, hanging over empty intersections as if deliberately holding me back, warning me that worse was still waiting. The morning sun was blinding, but carried no warmth, just an ache in my eyes, sharp and merciless. I parked at the farthest corner of the lot, out of old habit, then walked fast toward the entrance. One hand jammed deep in my pocket, the other pressed hard against my chest, as if to keep something from breaking loose inside. Every hospital carries the same smell, sterile coldness mixed with burnt coffee. But today, it was sharper, harsher, flooding straight into my lungs. The white lights overhead glared so hard they felt less like illumination and more like interrogation, scrutinizing every step. A volunteer led me to Henry's room. When I stepped inside, I froze. On the bed lay a man who no longer resembled the one who had climbed my roof just 2 years ago, hammer ringing in the Sunday. Now Henry was weightless, pale, his skin whiter than the pillow beneath his head. His breath came shallow, chest rising only slightly, his once neat hair fallen across his forehead, making him look both younger and unbearably fragile. The monitors beeped in stubborn rhythm, lights blinking in time with his slowed heartbeat. Amina sat pressed close to the bed, her plastic chair sagging under her weight. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, fighting back tears that trembled at the corners. "Noah," she rose, her voice broken, strained, as if afraid it would shatter. "Thank you for coming. Noah, N.E.T. How is he?" I asked, my own voice, low, cold, pressed tight. They're trying to stabilize his heart," she answered, her hands clasped hard at her chest, not in prayer, but as though holding in what little air remained. "The doctors said they found signs of a plant toxin. They're still running more tests." I stepped closer to the bed. Henry's lips parted faintly, breath shallow and fragile. The image of him on a ladder, hammer flashing in the sun, replayed in my head. And now, all that strength was reduced to tubes and blinking numbers on a screen. "Did he eat anything unusual last night?" I asked, my eyes fixed on his pale face. "Or drink anything out of the ordinary?" Amina's gaze locked on mine. Her eyes asked the question before her mouth could. "We only had 1 glass of whiskey each with dinner." Her voice shook, then broke into words. "The bottle you brought." I swallowed hard. He said it was the best whiskey he'd ever tasted. He wanted to save the rest, for a special occasion. My jaw clenched until my temples throbbed. "Amina, I need you to tell the doctors exactly that it was a new, unopened bottle, and that I can give them a separate sample from the same one." Her hand lifted toward mine, then froze, gripping the bedrail instead. Her voice trembled. "Noah, what is this, do you think?" I exhaled, eyes heavy, my voice edged with restraint. "I don't know what I think. Half a lie. But I do know one thing." I leaned closer, meeting her fearful eyes. "I will find the truth, no matter what I have to walk through to get it." And in that moment I knew my words weren't just a promise. They were a vow that would drag me into places I had never imagined I would have to go. The doctor walked in, a man in his 60s, shoulders weighed down, eyes evasive, as if long accustomed to carrying bad news without ever having enough words to soften it. His voice was low, steady, heart rate, enzymes, continued monitoring, safe terms, familiar. He didn't say what he didn't know, and truthfully, he didn't know much at all. Yet the silence between his words carried more weight than what he spoke aloud. When he left, Amina slumped back into her chair. The nod she gave when I promised to call her carried no weight. Her hands were locked together so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if letting go meant everything would unravel. I stepped into the hallway. The sliding doors opened, and sunlight spilled across the sidewalk in a false brightness, blazing yet cold. The outside world looked like a dazzling postcard, only there to conceal the rot festering inside the hospital rooms I just left. In the truck, I didn't start the engine right away. The key froze halfway. The rearview mirror reflected a face I barely recognized, not mine, but that of a stranger, hollow, brittle, one crack away from breaking. I whispered, as if testing the weight of the words in the air. White snakeroot. The words sounded venomous, deliberate. Back home, I went straight to the refrigerator. The harsh white light burst out as the door opened, cold and surgical. The glass jar with half a cup of whiskey still sat there, seemingly harmless, yet whispering a deadly secret through its amber glow. I set it on the counter. Then I went to the trash bin. Lifting the lid, a fly buzzed out, the acrid stench hitting me like a slap. My heart stalled when I saw the empty space where the small plastic vial had been. The bag had been lifted and set back upside down. Someone had been here. No forced locks, no open windows. Yet I knew, the way you know when a room has been rearranged, even if you can't point to what's been moved. My hand trembled on the lid, but my eyes went cold. I would not allow myself weakness. I picked up the phone and called Oliver. "It's gone," I said the moment he answered. "The vial. Someone took it from the trash. It wasn't me. I know what my own hands have done inside this house." Oliver paused, then spoke with a heavy rasp. "You need to notify the authorities. The whiskey can still prove something, but the vial was clean evidence. And Noah, yes? Don't let whoever did this think you're asleep." "I'm not," I replied, then hung up. I brewed coffee I didn't want, sat at the table, and laid out a sheet of lined paper. My hand shook, ink bleeding into the fibers as if each word carved itself into my chest. On the left, "What I know. Liam sent the bottle. Liam asked if I'd tried it. His voice changed when I said I'd given it to Henry. The whiskey Oliver tested contained white snake root. The vial is gone. On the right, what I can prove. Oliver's test results. The remaining whiskey sample. Liam's phone call, if my memory doesn't betray me." I stared at the two columns, longing for a bridge between them. But bridges don't appear just because you want them. You have to build them. I pulled an old digital recorder from the drawer, corners scuffed, battery half full, but faithful. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Its weight pressed against my chest like a hand reminding me to breathe, reminding me I was still alive. When I reached Liam's neighborhood, the clock read 1:02, then ticked over to 1:03. Identical houses, neat and soulless. His looked like a showroom model, too tidy, too sterile. His polished truck sat in the driveway, newer by a decade than mine. He opened the door. His face shifted 3 times, surprise, calculation, then a mask of warmth. "Dad," he said, as if expecting me, as if clueless to why I'd come. "What a surprise." "Is it?" I asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The house smelled faintly of lemon, but felt lifeless. "I heard about Henry," he said, closing the door. "Scary. Mia's with him. The doctors think it might be a virus." "Is that so? That's what they think?" My voice was flat. "Yes, that's what they said." I walked into the kitchen. 3 bottles lined the counter, 2 bourbons, 1 rye, all unopened, standing like soldiers. None matched the one I'd given him. I turned back. He was watching me, that strained smile fixed like a mask. "Have you tried the bottle you sent me?" I asked. He shrugged, chuckled lightly. "It was meant for you, Dad. Your birthday. You know I don't drink anymore." "I heard Henry enjoyed it," I said, my tone sharp as glass. "Said the best part was on the middle shelf, the single malt." Liam blinked once, slower than instinct should allow. I never told you where it was kept." For a second, he froze like an animal hearing a twig snap. Then a crooked smile returned, forced. "Of course you did. When you get sentimental, you ramble." I didn't. I held his gaze until he had to choose: look away, look back, or find another move. He chose the third, grabbing a dish towel and polishing an already dry glass. "You always overthink, Dad," he said, eyes fixed on the glass. "Always fixing things nobody asked you to fix." "You sent me a $500 bottle I couldn't drink," I said. "I'm fixing that." He set the glass down, spread his arms, voice syrupy. "Then don't. Maybe this time, just give me a little trust." I studied him. 3 decades of lies had made his voice smooth, persuasive. But I knew better. Last night's silence hovered between us like a third presence, swinging its legs from the counter and grinning. "I'll ask you one question," I said, "and I'll let the silence answer it." "Go ahead." "Did you tamper with that bottle of whiskey?" Silence. A silence alive. The fridge hummed. The microwave clock clicked from 1:02 to 1:03. Outside, a car rolled by, tires grinding slowly against the pavement. He didn't answer. He didn't deny it. "Goodbye, Liam," I said. "Sometimes walking away is the only truth left." "Dad," he called as I turned, his voice like a hook, part lure, part threat. "If you keep accusing me, you'll only push me further away." "I'm not accusing," I said to the door. "I'm collecting." Outside, the air was sharp, metallic on the tongue. I slid into the truck, pressed my thumb against the recorder's stop button. The red light died. I set it on the passenger seat and stared at it, as if it were a mute witness I might someday be forced to call. My hands were steady, but my mind swirled like a flock of crows. I didn't drive home, not yet. Instead, I pulled into the far edge of the supermarket lot, where no one noticed. The automatic doors kept opening and closing, each motion like a stray heartbeat, announcing someone was about to step into my life. But no one did. I sat there, hands on the wheel, and made the call I should have made the moment Oliver had spoken. The words, "White Snakeroot." "Inspector Lucas," a voice answered after 2 rings. I drew a breath. "Inspector, this is Noah. I have information on a poisoning. I have a sample and a recording you'll want to hear." Silence. Then his voice came back, cold and metallic. "Can you be here this afternoon?" "Yes," I said, my voice dry. He gave me a time and a room number, tucked away in the back corridor of the station. When I hung up, I caught the glint of headlights in the rearview mirror, as if something had been following me. But when I turned, there was nothing but an empty stretch of road, cold and bare. Back home, I stopped at the mailbox. Sometimes you needed a trivial act to keep from being swallowed whole. Flyers, a bill, a grocery ad, a postcard from a dealership promising 0% interest, paper-thin lies to cover something bleeding underneath. Inside, I sealed the glass jar in a Ziploc, slid it into an old cigar tin, tucked the recorder beside it. The tin went into a paper bag with handles, then into another bag on top of that. After the plastic vial had vanished from my trash, double wrapping wasn't paranoia anymore. It was survival. The bag rode beside me, strapped in like a passenger I knew would one day betray me. On the drive, the radio sang, but I didn't listen. Sweet songs about love and summer only soured me, then drained me, then left me hollow. The daylight outside was no longer neutral, it was surgical, like an operating lamp exposing everything, cold and merciless. The police station was cooler than the hospital, smelled cleaner too, but the pressure in the air remained. Lucas was waiting in a small room with a window that looked straight onto a brick wall. No exit. He was younger than me, but his eyes had the weariness of someone who'd seen too many lies. He offered me a glass of water. I took it, drank, because people notice when you refuse. "Start," he said, his voice an order. "Tell me about the whiskey." So I told him. Dates. Liam's words. The silence that hadn't sounded like surprise. I didn't give him theories. I just laid down the cards of truth, letting him arrange them. Then I placed the paper bag on his desk, pulled out the tin, opened it, set down the glass jar and the recorder like the opening tools of a job. Lucas didn't touch them yet. Instead, he asked the small questions that weren't small at all. Who else has keys to your house? When did you last check your trash? Have you mentioned the vial to anyone besides Oliver? At last he picked up the recorder, weighing it as if it carried the weight of a vow. Noah, he said slowly, this doesn't become a case because you and I have a hunch. It becomes a case when what you've given me survives scrutiny. I understand, I rasped. I want it scrutinized. He nodded. We'll send the sample to the state lab, copy the recording. If there's cause, we proceed. If not, we'll tell you why. He paused, eyes drilling into me. You'll have to accept that. I accept, I said, and for once, I believed it. When I rose to leave, he called my name, as if testing its weight on the air. Noah. Yes? Don't speak to your son. Not until I say. If he calls, note the time, every word, and keep your answers shorter than his questions. I nodded, surprised by the relief of finally having someone else carry a fraction of the burden I'd been dragging. Outside, the afternoon was a harsh, glaring gray, a light that hurt the eyes more than it lit the way. I drove to the hospital. Henry lay there, fragile between life and death. A faint blush had returned to his skin, his breath steadier. Amina sat at his side, clutching his hand. When I touched the bed rail, Henry cracked his eyes open. You look awful, he whispered. You should see yourself, I said, and we both gave the half-smile men use when a full smile costs too much muscle. I heard you made friends with the police, he muttered, voice as thin as ash. I just want to make sure when they show up, they're standing on our side. He nodded once, closed his eyes, and drifted back into sleep. I lingered longer than I should, listening to the machines keep his heartbeat honest. Amina whispered things that belonged only to them. In the hall, I called Oliver. Thanks for moving faster than I had any right to expect, I said. He answered simply, that's what friends do, and Noah, watch your back. I stayed silent, because I knew he was right. The house stood exactly as I had left it, but the silence inside was no longer peace. It clung to every room like a silent witness, watching, judging. Dim lights seeped through the curtains, faded as though filtered through smoke. The refrigerator droned on, the hallway bulb flickered, and from the faucet, heavy drops fell like a countdown. My house, once familiar, now felt like a trap. Every ordinary detail turned strange and heavy. I made myself an omelet, but left it half done, dousing the flame and scrubbing the pan. Some things you do not to eat, but to prove to yourself that you are still human, still ordinary. Then I opened the hall closet, pulled down the fireproof box, and set it on the kitchen table. Inside was a lifetime. My birth certificate, the deed to the house, and Mina's rose gold wedding ring I still hadn't found the strength to let go of. I tore a sticky note, my hand trembling, letters crooked, ink smudging into the paper. Whiskey sample for police. Do not discard. I stuck it to the inside of the lid and stared, unsure who I was writing it for. Maybe only for myself, a reminder that truth needed to be preserved. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go to bed. I lay on the sofa, the hallway light burning all night. In restless dreams, I wandered an empty house, hearing footsteps behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing but the jaundiced blur of a light bulb. I woke drenched in cold sweat, chest heaving as if something heavy pressed down on me. The last time I slept on that couch was after the heart attack, and I hated the way the two memories now stood side by side. At dawn, I brewed coffee but didn't drink it. I only listened to the house breathe or pretend to breathe. Outside, the clouds hung low, heavy. My lawn refused to grow green no matter how much I watered it. The neighbors were unusually quiet. The air was thick, on the verge of rain, holding everything in oppressive stillness. Later in the morning, I called Amina. She said Henry might be moved out of intensive care if his numbers stayed well behaved. That word made my chest sink. A word meant for children, now applied to a heartbeat. Yet I liked the way it sounded, a fragile hope dangling in the air, ready to snap at any moment. At exactly 9 a.m., the landline rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. I let it ring, then roll into voicemail. 2 rings. Then a voice. "Dad, it's me." Liam's voice was taut, drawn tight like steel wire. "We need to talk. The sooner the better." A pause, then slower, heavier. "Call me back." I sat still, playing the message over and over. Each time his voice replayed, the wire in my chest pulled tighter, like a hook dragging me in. I didn't call back. Instead, I wrote down the time, every word, and locked it inside the fireproof box. Sometimes you have to create your own evidence, even against your own blood. I looked out the window. The porch swing creaked once, though no wind blew. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow slip past, but when I squinted, there was only emptiness. If you want me to say I wasn't afraid, I won't. Fear had become part of the truth now, like nails driven into wood, holding the frame upright. I set my hand on the back of the chair, my palm cold as metal. I knew, without writing it down, that this had passed the point where a father and son could sit and fix things by speaking slower, softer than before. It had passed the point where a bottle of whiskey was just a gift, and a hospital was just someplace that happened to other people. This would get worse before it ever got better, and I would keep moving, room by room, call by call, breath by steady breath, until the truth revealed itself, or everything collapsed. There is a kind of silence that never sits still. It creeps through the rooms, taps its rhythm on the rim of a coffee cup, stares at the phone lying on the counter, and counts to 60 with me only to start again. Last night I learned this. Even quiet itself can become a threat. Detective Lucas had told me not to call Liam back. I obeyed. I wrote down the time of his voicemail as carefully as one would record the license plate of a suspect's car. And yet, the next morning, the house still carried the feeling that someone was shadowing my every step. The windows reflected my blurred face back at me, making me shudder as if the house itself was staring in return. The wooden beams swelled and creaked like the heartbeat of an old man. The October light was pale, like a thin veil drawn over the Sunday. I made a slow circuit. The back door, the window latches, the garage door. The stubborn lock that had to be lifted before it could turn was unchanged. Everything was normal, but normal never means safe. I brewed another pot of coffee, didn't drink it, and opened the fireproof box on the kitchen table. Inside was a lifetime, the deed to the house, insurance papers, Amina's rose gold wedding ring, and my stack of index cards. I added another, Detective Lucas, 2:30 p.m., underlined twice. That box was no different from a small coffin, where I buried the truth so it wouldn't dissolve. As I was about to leave, I froze in the front hallway. The lock bore a fresh scratch, the glint of metal catching the light like a wound torn across skin. No sign of forced entry, no door splintered. But I knew someone had a key. My chest felt heavy as stone. Quietly, I rummaged through a drawer, pulled out a length of white thread and clear tape. I laid the thread low across the floor near the door, fixing it in place slowly, almost like a ritual. Then I stood there, staring at it longer than necessary, as if waiting for it to break on its own. When I backed the truck out of the drive, the house looked harmless, hollow, just an empty shell. But I knew better. I had left behind a sleeping animal, and it could wake at any moment. Lucas's office. The police station sat 3 turns and a long stretch of road away. The hallway leading to Lucas's office was so silent that my footsteps echoed like a confession. He received me in a small room, its single window staring at a wall of raw brick, a room thick with the smell of paper, where truth was worn down into evidence. He shook my hand, then motioned me to a chair. His eyes were bright yet seasoned, the eyes of a man accustomed to gazing into shadows others refused to face. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Noah," he began. "And for the whiskey sample yesterday. We've sent it to the state lab, The preliminary results from your friend Oliver match what we've found. We take this matter very seriously." "I suppose seriousness comes in degrees," I replied. A thin, cold smile crossed his face. "Correct. At this stage it means gathering additional evidence, hospital records, your recording, the chain of custody for the sample." Then he slid a legal pad across the desk toward me. "I want a detailed timeline. When you received the package, when you gave it to Henry, when your son called, when the sample disappeared." I recounted it plainly. His pen moved steadily, pausing only to confirm dates and times. When I finished, he tapped the pen against the pad and leaned back. "You said the trash bag was disturbed, turned the wrong way. I didn't touch it. Any signs of forced entry? Number. Anyone else with a key?" I swallowed hard. The answer wanted to stretch across a lifetime, but the truth surfaced instead. 5 years ago, after my heart attack, Liam had come to the house to fetch some things for me. I was never certain he gave the key back. "After the heart attack," I said slowly. "He had a key then. I don't remember him ever returning it." Lucas nodded, neither surprised nor reassured. He simply added another line to the page. "If someone could enter without breaking in, that explains how the sample disappeared. Did anyone else know about it?" "Only Oliver." "Good. I'll ask him to record your conversation, so no one can claim we fabricated this later." He closed the pad, then fixed his eyes on mine. "Noah, hear me clearly. Do not meet your son. If he calls, note the time and his words. If he invites you somewhere, tell me immediately. I don't believe he's interested in conversation anymore." I remembered Liam's voice on the voicemail, drawn tight like a cable under a hot car hood, dangerous to touch. "I'll do exactly as you say," I replied. He slid a business card across the desk. "My cell number. If anything unusual happens, call me. I'd rather be wrong twice than right too late." The hospital. As I pulled into the hospital garage, Amina called. Her voice was choked. "Henry is doing better. They're moving him to recovery. Every time he wakes up, he apologizes as if he's ruined someone's party." "He'll be welcomed with a whole celebration when he comes home," I replied. In the room, Henry sat propped against pillows, pale but with eyes bright. When I stepped in, he clasped my forearm, the firm grip of working men, as though to anchor me to the ground. "You look worse than I do today," he said, making Amina laugh softly. "I brought the worst of me to visit," I answered, pulling up a chair. "Tomorrow I'll bring something better." When the curtain drew gently, Henry lowered his voice. "Noah, just between us, do you think Liam did this?" I held his gaze. "I think that bottle wasn't a gift." He studied me a long moment, as though trying to learn a new language from my face. Then he asked, "Are you sure you're strong enough to handle this?" "I'll do it by the law," I replied. "That's not what I asked." I kept silent long enough for him to know I'd heard him. Then I said, "I'll be all right handling this." Henry gave my forearm a hard squeeze before letting go. Men like us don't embrace except at farewells. That squeeze was the rare ticket that allowed emotion to surface without paperwork. The curtain opened. Amina returned, accompanied by a young woman in her early 30s, hair tied neatly in a ponytail, eyes weary yet still sharp. I recognized her instantly from the photos on Liam's mantle. Mia, my daughter-in-law. Since the wedding, we had spoken only a few times, polite as neighbors separated by a few blocks. "Noah," she said, her voice trembling but steadied by will, I'm glad you're here." I stood. "Are you holding up?" Mia glanced at Henry, then lowered her voice. Afraid, angry, but mostly afraid. Her hands twisted together, fingers trembling. "We need to talk." Amina stroked Henry's hand, then rose. "I'll give you two some privacy." She slipped into the hallway. She was the kind of woman who knew when to withdraw, even when no one asked. Mia motioned toward a small family waiting room nearby. There, a coffee machine spat out black liquid that tasted of plastic, and two straight-backed chairs looked anything but comfortable. She didn't sit, neither did I. Mia began, her voice hoarse. I don't know what you already know, but I know Liam has been different for a long time. Distant, secretive. He keeps jars in the garage inside them, just dried plants. He says it's a hobby. She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering. He's also in some online groups about herbal extractions. I don't think it connects to this. But still. White snake root, I cut in. Have you ever heard that name? Mia's eyes widened. There was recognition and fear. Yes, I saw it in his search history. I thought he was just reading, nothing more. Inspector Lucas will want to speak with you, if you're willing. She nodded quickly. I already called him. Left a message. Well done, I said. But inside, relief tangled with a dull ache like two close relatives who never stop trading visits. Mia, if you have anything, screenshots, messages, photos of those jars, keep them. Let Lucas trace it. She stared at me so long I felt as if her gaze pierced straight through my skin. Why would he do this to you? I could have listed a dozen reasons. The money I refused him. The affection I never gave in the way he wanted. Disappointments that hooked themselves like barbs. But instead, I gave the only truth I knew for certain. Because if he can't own the story, he'll burn the page. Mia shuddered, as though my words had just sent a cold draft through the stifling room. This morning, she whispered, he asked me if I'd heard anything from you. Then he said, he wanted to know if you liked the bottle. What did you say? I told him you gave it to my father. We stood in silence. That sentence hung in the air, shifting shape depending on how you looked at it. Thank you, I said, for being honest. I'm sorry, she replied, and I knew she meant it for far more than just what she had told me. We went back to Henry's room, talking about harmless things: football, the weather, the soup the cafeteria insisted on calling chicken noodle. I left when the nurse came to check the monitors, promising to bring a few magazines next time and pretending that mattered. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store, bought 2 new locks and a packet of stick-on alarms. The clerk bagged them like vegetables. He said something about winter coming early. I muttered that I just wanted to be ready. We often wish each other a good day, but not every day listens. Back home, the thread I'd placed across the doorframe was still intact. I stepped over it, closed the door with a soft click. I had thought of calling a locksmith, but installing new locks with my own hands felt like making my bed in a strange motel. Only then could my mind rest a little easier. I fitted the back lock first, then the front, turned them slow and firm, my forearm muscles remembering the angle and push of metal. The alarms peeled from their backing with a sticky shriek. I tested one, opened the door, the piercing wail filled the house. At least they worked. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped low, stretching shadows long across the floor. I reheated a can of soup, ate standing up, bowl in my left hand, spoon in my right. Old habits, fewer dishes to wash. The phone buzzed on the hall table. I didn't jump. I walked to it slowly, like someone about to open a door he already knew what was behind. Unknown number. I let it ring, then fall silent. A few seconds later, the screen lit up. Liam, we need to talk face to face today. Liam, don't make this worse than it already is. I set the phone down, my hand tingling as if it had brushed fire. I wrote the time and words on an index card, slipped it into the small coffin on the kitchen counter. Then I took Lucas's card, dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. Lucas, it's Noah. He wants to meet. Don't. His voice was cold, final like a deadbolt sliding shut. Forward the messages to me. I'll log them. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. He already left one. I wrote it down. Good. Keep doing that. I hesitated. Inspector, could you come by to look at my door? I think someone used a key that wasn't mine. I'll send someone to photograph it. If I can, I'll come myself. 40 minutes later, he arrived with Jack, a young officer. They took pictures of the scratch where a key had scraped against the thread I'd taped low across the frame. The metal gleamed like a fresh cut on skin. Lucas showed no expression, not smug at being right, not feigning surprise at what was obvious. "Do you still have the original set of keys?" he asked. I fetched the old tin box from the hall closet. Inside were 2 brass keys neatly labeled in Amina's handwriting, front and back. But there was also another unlabeled, its teeth cut unevenly, sitting out of place like an intruder. My stomach clenched, cold as stone. "This one isn't ours," I said. "We always label. Everything is always labeled." My stomach clenched, cold as ice. "This one isn't ours. We always label them. Everything is labeled." Lucas nodded, ordering Jack to seal it. "We'll try to lift Prince. Can't promise, but we'll try." "Do your best," I said. "I want every loose fragment to stop pretending it isn't connected." When they left, the house looked different. Not safer, not less watched, just witnessed. And once the outside world steps into your private life, the ground tilts, then settles again at a new angle. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling an empty coffee cup in both hands. The porch swing creaked. No wind. I listened for footsteps that weren't there. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb, face down. When I was young, I thought adulthood meant no one could order me around. Now it means learning who you should listen to. Around 9 o'clock, an engine idled outside long enough for me to look through the window. Headlights swept across the porch, then vanished. Could have been someone lost. Or it could have been someone checking if I would flinch. I didn't sleep. I lay on the sofa, hall light on, shoes beside the door. Too old to play the hero, but not old enough to stop being ready. Just before dawn, the phone buzzed again. Voicemail, no ring. I played it back with the volume low. "Dad, you're ruining everything." Liam's voice came faint, as if he were somewhere the walls themselves weren't allowed to hear. "You went to the police. Not smart. We can handle this ourselves. You're not thinking straight." Then the line cut. I wrote it down. "We can handle this ourselves." Heavy words. Handle what exactly? 8 a.m., Lucas called. His voice rasped like steel scraping steel. The state lab confirmed. White snaker root. Enough to officially open a case. We move forward. I exhaled. That breath had been trapped in my chest ever since Oliver first spoke the name. Keep recording everything. Lock your doors. Absolutely no confrontation. If he contacts you, log it. If he shows up, call 911 immediately. I mean it. "I understand," I said. "Thank you," Lucas replied. Not the polite, "you're welcome," but a cold affirmation. "We'll do our duty." For a man like him, duty and promise meant the same. I showered, shaved, put on a clean shirt. Some days, a man has to wear neatness like armor. I ate breakfast slowly, each bite chewed as if it were an irreversible choice. Driving to the hospital, I carried a stack of home and garden magazines, gardens that would never grow in Missouri clay. Henry was lucid enough to pretend interest in an article about chainsaw safety. We both knew he was humoring me, but pretending, sometimes, is its own kindness. Mia came in while I was halfway through a section on hardwood floor maintenance. She clutched her phone tight, her face drawn like someone who hadn't slept in a bed for nights, only dozed in a chair beside one. "Inspector Lucas called me," she said, her voice hoarse. "He wants me to bring Liam's old laptop. I still have it, from before we got married." "Bring it," I said, voice dry. "Let the law carry what it was born to carry." She nodded, but her eyes dropped, heavy as lead. "Noah," he texted me. Her voice trembled. "He asked if Dad was playing the hero. Then he said, 'If anything happens, it's Dad's fault.'" A hot surge rose in my chest, not fear, but a sharper clarity. I could tell the difference now. A warning or a threat. "I've already forwarded the message to Lucas," I told her. "Good." I looked straight at her. "Don't reply to anything he sends. Not a word. Not even to say you won't respond." Leaving the hospital, the outside light had the weak honesty of autumn noon. I took the long way home, not from fear, but to put more miles between myself and what was coming. When I crossed the threshold, the thread was still in place. I closed the door as if closing a boundary. On the kitchen table, I spread out a yellow sheet of paper and wrote in bold letters, "What does he want?" Beneath it, I drew 2 columns, money and control. Under money, last winter, $20,000, refused. Under control, bottle moved, plastic vial missing, phone call, we need to talk. The control side weighed far heavier. Money was a reason, control was a habit, and habits cling longer than any debt. At noon sharp, the door alarm shrieked, ripping through the silence. I jolted, phone already in my hand before my mind could remind my body that it was an overreaction. Another alarm tone. I shifted out of sight from the window, tugged the curtain open a slit. A delivery truck. The driver left a padded envelope on the doormat, no return address. He shrugged and walked away. I let my heart slow before opening the door. Inside the envelope, a printed photo from a phone. My porch, taken from across the street, at night, the swing motionless, the porch light on, no figure in sight. But in the far left corner of the frame, half a sleeve, just enough shadow to prove the watcher had been closer than I thought. My stomach knotted. My throat went dry like swallowing stones. I slid the photo into the fireproof box, the small coffin, where I buried truth to keep it from vanishing, and dialed Lucas. "Don't throw it away," he said as soon as he picked up. "I'll send someone to collect it. You'll get tired of hearing from me over and over." "I'd rather that than the other possibility," he replied, his voice closing like an iron door. That afternoon, light drained slowly from the floorboards. The porch swing stirred once, though no wind blew. The house felt alive, breathing bones creaking in the wood, the refrigerator's hum hissing secrets I wasn't ready to hear. Late at night, the phone buzzed. A text. "Liam, you think they'll keep you safe from what you started? Call me." I didn't. I copied the words down, filed them in the box, set it on the highest shelf, the way a man hides a heavy stone to keep from tripping over it in the dark. Night fell. I lay on the sofa, hand on my chest, feeling the heartbeat slow, steady, professional, like a clock ticking down. The doctor's old words echoed, "You'll know when it's coming." Tonight, I believed him more than ever. At 6:12 a.m., the phone rang. I answered on the first tone. "Mr. Noah," Lucas said, cutting straight to it. "The state lab confirmed. White snake root. We're filing for a warrant." I closed my eyes, picturing the porch swing, the thread of white across the doorframe, the photo from across the street, and the bottle, catching morning light like it was filled with shame. "Where do you need me?" I asked. "Right where you are. And remember, whatever happens, don't open that door unless the person outside proves they came to help." I stood still, listening as the house fell silent, as if it too were bracing. They say the most unforgettable knock is the one you don't expect. But this time, I was ready. Still, when the knock came firm, deliberate, my chest tightened. Not from fear, but from knowing my own heart had just made the sound of a gun's chamber clicking shut, short, final, irreversible. On the porch, Lucas stood with Jack and another young officer. He held up a document sealed in clear plastic. "The judge signed it at 7:43. We have authority to search your son's house." I didn't need to hear more. This was the step that could change everything. "Do you need me to come along?" I asked. "No," Lucas answered, his voice sharp as a blade. "And that's not a request, it's an order. We don't want him to see you today. We'll conduct the search. If we find what we expect, we'll proceed by the book." Proceed by the book, police language for, by dinner, your life could already be different. Jack glanced past me down the dim hallway, where the weak yellow light stretched the shadows into long, grasping arms. "Any changes overnight?" he asked. "Nothing." The alarm stayed quiet. Lucas gave a curt nod, eyes hard as saw teeth. "Good, keep it that way. By week's end, we'll have technicians install a proper camera system. no gaps left open. They left in formation, one unmarked black sedan, one patrol car with blue and red lights, like two punctuation marks closing a sentence that wasn't finished. I stayed at the threshold until they turned the corner, then shut the door. The thread under the frame still held taut like a challenge, daring someone to cut it. The hours that followed dragged on, thick and heavy. I tried to read, but each line on the page felt like strangers waiting at a bus stop unrelated to me, detached from my world. I brewed coffee but didn't drink it, only listened to the water hiss and boil, a suffocating reminder that silence never truly rests. Near 11 o'clock, I drove slowly out of town and stopped at the small Veterans Memorial Park. The bench where I sat faced a fountain that had been dry since last summer. In the distance, traffic from Main Street echoed faintly enough to remind me the world kept moving, but not enough to break the stillness pressing in on me. I once brought Liam here when he was 10. We fed the ducks with scraps of bread. He had asked me, "What are the names on that wall?" "They're the names of people who fulfilled their duty to the very end," I told him. "Does that mean they finished their mission?" I nodded. He never asked what the mission was. Sometimes, I think I should have explained that part. At 1 o'clock sharp, I returned home, sitting at the kitchen table with the phone face down. I didn't expect Liam to call. He was not the kind of man to use a phone for pleas. He was the kind to appear unannounced, forcing the rhythm of a conversation to his own beat. That was exactly what worried Lucas. At 1:17, the phone buzzed. Not a call, but a message from Mia. "They're here. I'm in the bedroom, door locked. I can hear them going through the garage." I typed back, "Stay inside. Don't interfere. You're safe as long as they're there." No reply. I pictured her perched on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tight, trembling as she listened to the heavy footsteps on concrete, the scrape of cardboard boxes dragged across the floor, the metallic clatter of tools. I knew that sound, the sound of people digging for truth, indifferent to whether they woke the whole house in the process. At 2:04, the phone rang. "Lucas. We found it." The words dropped heavy as stone. "Found what?" 3 glass jars, labeled with tape, WSR, root talk, and tincture. 2 contained dried herbs, consistent with white snake root. The third held a liquid. "We'll send it to the lab for confirmation." There were handwritten notes on preparation, dosage, and, he paused, his voice lower, an envelope addressed to you, unopened. Inside was a short letter, your name at the top, and the last line, "You'll understand why when everything ends." Between those lines was only a drawing of a tree, its roots circled in shaky ink, blurred as if the writer had hesitated or deliberately marred it. The kitchen suddenly felt ice cold. He had left a message just in case the bottle had already done its work. "That's how it looks," Lucas said. "Regardless, we'll file it, seal it, and photograph everything. Mia has been fully cooperative. She's agreed to hand over all shared digital devices." "Have you caught him yet?" I asked, my hand clenching so hard the knuckles turned white. "Not yet. He wasn't home when we arrived. A warrant is being issued for his arrest." "Detective, if he comes here, call 911 immediately. I've flagged your address for priority response. Do not confront him. I mean it, Noah. The line went quiet for a beat. Then his voice came back, sharp as a blade. "We're moving from suspicion to evidence. The game has changed." "I understand." Around 3:30, I called Amina to give her the update. Henry was still asleep. She listened without interrupting, just as she had years ago when I phoned from the ER after the heart attack. "Noah," she said, voice strained, "this only ends 2 ways. Either he's arrested or he runs." "He won't get far," I answered. "Number but far enough to rob you of sleep." 4:12. The door alarm shrieked, slicing through the afternoon like a knife. 3 steps and I was already in the hallway, phone ready in my hand. The front door was intact, the thread stretched taut beneath the frame still unbroken. The sound had come from the back. I moved slowly, each step like listening to my own heartbeat. Through the kitchen window, I saw the screen door shiver once, twice, then fall still. no one in sight. As I approached, I spotted a folded note wedged between the handle and the frame. I pulled it out. One sentence, scrawled in thick black marker, jagged and crude. "Stop letting them in, or I will." No name, no envelope, just that. I snapped a photo, slipped the paper into a plastic bag, and called Lucas. He said he'd send someone in 15 minutes. Jack arrived in 10, photographing the note, the handle, the empty yard. "See anyone?" I asked. "No movement. Could have dropped it and run," Jack replied. He carried the note away. I stood in the kitchen, watching him leave, listening to the house creak, as if it, too, had just swallowed a secret. 9:45 p.m. The phone lit up. Unknown number. I let it roll to voicemail. A minute later, I pressed play. "Dad, it's me. They're making a mistake. The things they found, they're not what they think. You know me better than that." A pause. "Call me, please." The voice was calm, measured, almost gentle, the kind of voice a salesman uses to convince you to buy what you don't need. I didn't call back. I wrote it down word for word, slipped it into the box. Morning came with frost. The grass tips turned white, the air sharp with the taste of pennies. 8:12. A message from Lucas. "He's in custody. Peaceful arrest. Updates to follow." I sat in the house, listening to the groan of wood, the soft whine of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, all blending into a choir that whispered, "It isn't over yet." I leaned back, closed my eyes. In my mind echoed Liam's voice from years ago when he called me Dad with absolute trust. Now he still called me Dad, but only to threaten. Before noon, I drove to the station. The waiting room was small, 2 plastic chairs pressed against the wall, a vending machine humming in the corner like an endless wasp. The fluorescent bulb flickered, its cold light flat and merciless. It felt less like justice and more like a transit hub where lives stalled. Lucas emerged, his face motionless as stone. "He didn't say a word," he began, voice steady as an indictment read aloud in court. "Requested a lawyer immediately. Doesn't matter. We have enough to hold him." Mia supplied substantial digital evidence emails referencing route preparation, the phrase "perfect timing," and search history on lethal doses for people over 60. "What happens now?" I asked, hands sunk deep in my pockets to stop them from doing something foolish. "We'll move forward with charges to the prosecutor. Counts: attempted murder, possession of a controlled toxic substance, and destruction of evidence." His eyes fixed on me, as if to say, "The rules of the game have changed." I nodded. Lucas studied me closely, his gaze sharp as a needle pushing through skin. "You holding up?" "I'm still standing," I answered. "That's enough." When I left the station, the sky was the color of lead, heavy and strange. No forecast had mentioned snow, but the silvery light hinted otherwise. I drove aimlessly past the old factory, the shuttered hardware store, the diner still steeped in grease after 20 years. At last, the road delivered me to the hospital. Henry was awake, his eyes fixed on a game show he clearly wasn't watching. Amina sat beside him, her knitting needles moving steady, pulling blue yarn into fragile order. "They got him," I said quietly. Henry gave one nod. "Good." The needles kept their rhythm. Amina whispered, "And now?" "Now," I exhaled. "Now we wait for the rest to take its course." That night, I sat on the back steps with a cup of hot tea, steam bleeding into the damp chill. The yard held its breath, only a branch cracked now and then in the wind. Far off, a dog barked once, then was cut short, as if by an unseen hand. I thought of the note jammed in my door, the glass jars in the garage, the letter with the tree sketch and the circled roots. I thought of the boy who once stood with me at the war memorial, holding a piece of bread, asking, "Do those names mean they finished their mission?" Maybe this was my mission. Not to finish, but to endure so the truth would not bury me. Inside, I checked the thread across the door, still intact, taut as a vein waiting to burst. Poison is an ugly word. It doesn't just sit in the mouth, it seeps into the breath, reshapes how you see the world. Lucas hadn't told me directly. He let Oliver explain first, perhaps knowing it's easier to hear from a friend than from a detective. But nothing makes it easy to hear that the thing meant to kill you had been in the drink you placed into another man's hands. It began 2 mornings after Henry first collapsed. I was fumbling with a pot of oatmeal I had no intention of eating when the phone rang. Oliver's voice was low, restrained. "Noah, are you sitting down?" I glanced at the clock, then lowered myself into the kitchen chair. "I am. Tell me." I ran the test twice. Thought the first was contaminated, but no. The whiskey contained white snakeroot extract, enough to put a man with heart disease straight into ICU. Henry has a pacemaker, doesn't he? Yes. My mouth was dry as paper. And you've got heart trouble too. This wasn't an accident. The dosage was too precise. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Behind me, the fridge hummed a sound now indistinguishable from a distant siren. "Tell Lucas. He needs to know right now. I'll send my report. Keep your phone close." Less than 15 minutes later, Lucas arrived. Dark coat, jeans, but the badge glinted at his belt like a hidden blade. "Where is it?" he asked. No greeting, no sitting. I pointed to the cabinet where I'd kept it untouched. He slipped on gloves, lifting the bottle in both hands as though it were an unexploded charge. "You haven't opened it?" "Number seal's intact." I meant to let Henry decide. He examined the label, the wax, the engraved number, muttering, "This is a limited run, usually tracked by distributors. If Liam bought it himself, there'll be paperwork. If someone else bought it for him, then they're just as guilty as he is," I finished. That afternoon, I went back to the hospital. Henry sat upright, pale but alert, eyes fixed on the low-volume television. Amina was beside him, the unfinished blue yarn dangling from her hands. "They found it in the whiskey," I said quietly. "White snakeroot." Oliver tested it twice. Amina's hands froze mid-loop. "Noah, I'm sorry. I didn't know. God knows, I didn't know." Henry shook his head, his voice rough. "Don't blame yourself. You didn't put it in there." "No," I replied, chest tightening, "but I placed it in your hands." That night, the house was too quiet, so quiet the creak of old wood sounded like a failing heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, opened the fireproof box, my little coffin, and turned through each evidence card like pages in someone else's diary. I wondered what the last card would say. Near midnight, a faint clink of glass on wood pulled me from half-sleep. Through the frosted pane of the front door, I glimpsed a shadow leaving the steps. When I opened the door, the street was empty. At my feet lay a small square box wrapped in brown paper. No bow, no note. I didn't touch it. I called Lucas. "Stay clear. Let the police handle it," he ordered. Jack arrived 10 minutes later, crouched to inspect it, then let out a low whistle. "Looks like another bottle. Maybe whiskey, maybe not." They carried it off without opening it in front of me. The next day, Lucas confirmed. Not whiskey, just an empty decanter. Inside, a folded scrap of paper. "Next time." That was the moment I understood the case was no longer about evidence, it was about time. The only question left, how long before he tried again? The following morning, Lucas called early. The judge signed the warrant. "We execute tomorrow morning. Stay put, keep your head down." "This isn't my first time through something like this," I said. "Maybe not," he replied coldly. "But if you slip once, it'll be your last." The day limped by, dragging like a bad leg. I busied myself tightening hinges on the back door, adjusting the rail on the porch chores to keep from staring at the street. Around 5, Amina phoned. "Henry's coming home tomorrow. Doctor says he's stable." It should have been relief. Instead, it carved deeper the shadow of the loss we had nearly suffered. That evening, I wrote another card, warrant signed, search tomorrow. Then I sat by the front window, watching the last light drain from the street. The street lamp flickered. Somewhere, a dog barked twice, then went silent. I remembered Oliver's word precise, Precision can build or it can destroy. My son had chosen the latter. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow pressed closer. When dawn crept in, I brewed coffee but didn't drink it. I just sat, waiting for the phone to ring. 7:43, it rang. "We're on our way," Lucas said. And so this chapter closed, not with an answer, but with the quickened breath before the answer arrives. They say nothing prepares you to see your own child in handcuffs. I haven't seen it yet, but I know the day is coming. The only preparation left is silence, that moment when truth crawls out of the dark. And once it shows its face, it will never crawl back in. At 7:43 in the morning, Lucas said curtly over the phone, "We're moving out." By 8:15, I was sitting in my old Ford, 2 blocks from Liam's house. The windshield bore a long crack like a scar across a face, reflecting a suburban street that was usually quiet but now pressed down by an unnatural silence. I hadn't told Lucas I would be there. He surely would have ordered me to stay home. But there is a difference between being threatened and being warned. This was my battle too, even if I wasn't the one holding the warrant. Liam's house came into view at the corner, a typical suburban box, vinyl siding gleaming, the lawn too perfect, almost artificial. 2 officers stepped up onto the porch, Lucas right behind them. One of them knocked. The sound was dry, hollow, echoing like an unread verdict. Then silence, heavy as lead. The door opened, and there he was, my son. A faded Street Louis Cardinals t-shirt clung to his rigid frame, his jaw clenched so tight the veins showed. That face, I could barely recognize it anymore. When Lucas raised the paper, he folded his arms, retreating half a step. The officers crossed the threshold. Liam followed, body stiff as stone. I stayed in the car, engine off, my hands locked hard around the steering wheel. The cold metal bit into my palms, reminding me I had to remain still, restrain every urge to rush forward. In my head, I could hear the rhythm I knew from old searches during service. The swift sweep first, then the slowing, the sound of drawers snapping open, boxes shifting, paper rustling like breath. My phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. "Found something. Will update." That something appeared 20 minutes later, when an officer carried a clear evidence bag to the patrol car. From where I sat, I could still see the liquid sloshing inside amber whiskey glowing under the light, yet clouded by a pale streak like blood dissolving in water. The same kind of bottle Liam had once sent me. Same batch, same cut glass. Only this one was already half empty. I held my breath like a man at the edge of a cliff, knowing finding that bottle wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the end. At 9:05, Lucas came out. He scanned the street until his eyes landed on my car. He strode over, leaned down to the window. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice sharp as steel. "Too late," I answered. "What did you find?" "A few more bottles from the same batch, one opened, one still sealed. The opened one had white residue, faint, but identical to what Oliver found." I swallowed hard. "That's enough. Enough to push this forward." Lucas nodded, then hesitated. There was also a notebook, handwritten, partially coded, the ink smeared, some lines overwritten as if the writer's hand was shaking. From what I skimmed, it's filled with dosages, trials, and there are symbols, repeated letters, a few initials, could point to other people. The word trials fell heavy, like a stone dropped in my chest. So Henry wasn't the first. Lucas didn't need to say more. I leaned back, eyes fixed on that house. Somewhere inside it was still the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I drove to his first job, the young man I once stood beside at his wedding to Mia. And now it was a man who kept a notebook of dosages, a man who might be the reason Henry almost died. Lucas's radio crackled. He straightened, his tone clipped and cold. "They're bringing him out. You sure you want to see this?" "I've seen enough," I said, but I didn't start the car. The front door opened wide. Liam stepped out, flanked by 2 officers. His wrists cuffed in front, chin held high, his shoulders trembling slightly, whether from rage or fear. I couldn't tell. His eyes swept the street, then locked onto me. And he spoke, his voice carrying both contempt and a promise. "So, you're here too, Dad? Good, you'll have to watch." Our eyes locked. An invisible knife, no blood but sharp, cutting deep. No words, no nod, only that stare, the look one gives someone once known, now denied. They led him away, shoved him into the back seat of the patrol car. As the car pulled off, the morning sun flared on the windshield, blazing like fire, illuminating the split between us that could never be mended. I sat motionless until the red-blue lights vanished around the corner. Lucas returned, his voice heavy. "He's being taken to the station. We'll process him, begin interrogation. He'll probably call for a lawyer. You know this, Noah. If he's charged, this is the end. No turning back." "I know," I said, my voice dry. "And the notebook?" "We'll make copies before it goes into evidence," Lucas replied. But his eyes drifted, as if holding something back. "There are things in that notebook not everyone should see, but if you want, I'll let you look. Maybe some dates will line up with what you remember." Hearing him, I felt it clear. That notebook held more than dosages. It carried another secret, a secret so raw that even as it was written, the ink shook, the lines warped, as though the hand itself trembled at the truth it was forced to record. That afternoon at the station, Lucas placed the notebook on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like the turning of a deadbolt, making the already suffocating room feel even smaller. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The old fan rattled with each spin, every rotation a reminder that nowhere was truly safe. The handwriting was Liam's, each rigid loop of a "g", each pen stroke pressed so hard it left grooves on the next page. Some entries had dates followed by cold numbers. Others bore only symbols, a triangle, an asterisk. Oliver joined via speakerphone, his voice crackling. "Noah, that triangle is never a joke. In veterinary shorthand, it means half dose. The asterisk usually marks slow effect. And that number," his voice dropped, cutting bitterly. "That's how he wrote your death certificate." I turned to a page dated 6 months ago. Beside it, a single word test, then a triangle, then 2 letters, RC. My stomach clenched. R.C. Henry. Lucas noted it down, his voice sharp as a blade. So he was planning this half a year ago. 2 pages later I saw it. FD. Me. No triangle, no half-dose, just a number larger than any other. In that instant, blood surged to my ears, my vision dimmed. The ticking of the wall clock grew piercing, each second slicing into my hearing like a knife. The room seemed to tilt, air sucked out of it. Oliver whispered, "That's a lethal dose, Noah." I braced against the table to keep from collapsing. So Henry wasn't the only target. "No," Lucas replied, eyes cold as stone. "You were the other name." That night, the local news ran a story. Man arrested on charges of attempted murder by poisoning. They didn't name Liam, but the details were enough for anyone who knew us. Amina called. "Neighbors are talking. Henry's furious, says if Liam ever dares show his face." She trailed off. "You holding up, Noah?" "Not really," I said, "but I'm still alive, that's enough." I opened the fireproof box and added a new card, FD, lethal dose. The box was nearly full. It looked like a miniature coffin, each card a spade of dirt sealing it shut. 2 days later, Lucas called early. His lawyer wants a deal. Claims Liam didn't know the whiskey was tainted. Says he got it from a friend. But with that notebook, it's hard to believe. If he pleads down, he'd still serve time, maybe avoid a trial. Question is, do you want to see him in court? I looked out at the street where I once taught him to ride a bike. I remembered the whiskey, Henry lying still with a breathing tube, the monitor stretching into long beeps, and those 2 letters FD next to a number that meant never waking up. The line I once thought was family now blurred like chalk in the rain. The next morning at the station, Liam's lawyer, Alexander's silver hair, smug face shook my hand. "We can avoid an ugly trial," he said. "You mean avoid it for Liam?" I replied. He gave a thin smile. "He'll admit carelessness, not malice. That reduces the charge, not murder. It's Mython." I met his gaze. "You want to call that carelessness? What kind of carelessness requires precise notes on how to kill?" For the first time, Alexander lowered his eyes. Outside, Lucas walked beside me. "You don't have to decide now, but if it goes to trial, we have the evidence." "What should I do?" Lucas sighed. "If it were me, I'd make sure the next glass he pours doesn't send someone to the grave." That night, Henry called, his voice weak but firm. "If you compromise Noah, you're handing him a new gun. Next time the bullet won't miss, and next time it could be you." The following day, I met Oliver in his workshop, thick with the smell of oil and steel. He didn't soften his words. "Noah, a man who keeps dosage notes, isn't careless. He's deliberate. If you go easy now, you're just giving him pen and paper to write his next list." 3 days later, the hearing began. Alexander fought to dismiss half the evidence. The judge struck most of his objections. When Liam entered, his eyes swept the room and locked onto mine. They were flat, unrepentant, as if I was just another name in his death ledger. At the full trial, the prosecutor opened. "This is a case about trust. Trust given and betrayed in a way no one imagines until it's too late." Then the evidence played in the courtroom, a text from Liam's phone. "Make sure he drinks it all on the first pour. With his heart, it won't take much." The room froze. A juror covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. When it was my turn, Alexander tried to paint me as a bitter old man inventing stories against my son. "No," I said steadily. "I'm not inventing. I believe in the evidence, the kind my son left written all over that bottle." The next day, the jury returned. On the charge of first-degree attempted murder, the defendant. Half a second before they finished, I realized I'd been holding my breath since the whiskey first appeared. "Guilty." One word. Quiet, but it split the room apart. Some murmured, some wept. All I heard was my own heartbeat, pounding like a judge's gavel. The judge pronounced 25 years in prison, 15 without parole. Liam didn't flinch. Only when they led him away did he turn, eyes locking with mine. For an instant, there was no courtroom, no shackles, just the boy I once taught to throw a ball, staring at the father he'd tried to kill. His lips moved. "This isn't the end." And then, he was gone behind steel doors. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, there was only emptiness. Justice was written on paper, but no paper could mend the broken pieces between me and my son. Henry placed his hand on my shoulder as we stepped outside. His grip trembled, but his eyes were steady, as though he wanted to pass into me the full weight of a verdict that had just closed. "You did what had to be done, Noah. Don't ever let anyone, not even yourself, deny that." I nodded, but said nothing. Inside me, a gnawing voice still whispered, asking whether I had gained anything at all, or whether I had only lost more than I could measure. The air outside cut sharper than in the morning. The late autumn sky was heavy, gray clouds rolling low, the sun no more than a thin smear of light across the horizon. Wind knifed through my coat, stinging my skin like needles. Henry's daughter pulled up in a battered green pickup, helped him into the passenger seat, then gave me a quiet wave before driving off. I walked 2 blocks to where my own truck sat waiting. No reporters trailed me. This wasn't the kind of case that would ever make national headlines. But here, in this small circle of our county, the echoes would linger for years. Sliding into the driver's seat, I noticed something lying on the passenger side, an envelope, the kind court clerks hand you without ceremony. Inside was a list of Liam's personal property: watch, belt, wallet, and a single folded note. His handwriting: "You always said we were more alike than I wanted to admit. Maybe now you'll understand that was never a compliment." No signature, nothing more. My chest tightened, each word carving itself into me like a blade. I didn't crumple the note. I folded it back, slid it into the glove compartment, and turned the key. The cabin around me suddenly felt like a prison cell, just me and his words pressing in from all sides. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No cryptic messages, no sudden knocks at the door. Henry recovered faster than the doctors had dared to predict, though his craving for whiskey had vanished entirely. One afternoon, Oliver came by with a paper bag. Inside was a small glass bottle, the same whiskey he had tested for me. "Keep it, Noah," he said, "not as a trophy, but as a reminder. This liquid, looking so harmless, once stood between you and death." I set it beside the glass Henry had drunk from that night. Together, under the kitchen light, they looked almost ordinary, like props in a still-life painting. But I knew better. They were silent witnesses, carrying a weight no one else could grasp. 2 months after the sentencing, Detective Lucas stopped by after a fishing trip, leaning against my porch rail, the sunset glinting off his sunglasses. "They traced the origin of the poison," he said. "It wasn't Liam's idea at first. His wife's cousin works landscaping. He knew how to extract from white snake root. He thought he was helping. But it was Liam who chose to send it to you. That choice, that's what condemns him. It didn't erase anything. It didn't change the truth. But it confirmed what my bones already knew. Betrayal grows roots, and sometimes those roots run deeper than blood itself." That winter, I finally repaired the porch swing, the very one I had sat on the morning the package arrived. No more squeaking chains, no more cracked slats. One cold evening, I sat there with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun sink behind bare trees. On the table beside me sat the glass, the bottle, and a single manila envelope. Across its front, in my own hand, were the words, "Do not open." Inside were everything: the photos of Liam as a child, the court documents, and the note he had left me. One day, maybe, I'll choose whether to burn it or keep it, but for now, it stays sealed. People believe vengeance ends when the gavel falls, when the guilty are led away, but the truth is harsher. Vengeance is only the surface. Beneath it lies the lost years that can't be reclaimed, the conversations that will never be had, the family dinners that will forever leave an empty chair and a cold plate. Justice gave me safety, but it didn't give me peace. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke from somewhere down the road, I realized something. Peace isn't granted, it's built. One quiet evening at a time. One choice not to look back at a locked door. I lifted my coffee toward the empty yard, toward endings and whatever might come after. "And to what comes next," I said aloud. "Thank you for walking with me through this journey of truth, betrayal, and the cost of justice." If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your reflections in the comments below. And when you're ready for the next chapter, just click the playlist on your screen. I'll be waiting there with the rest of the story.